The Vampire King was seconds away from ripping a traitor apart when a poor waitress suddenly ran into the throne room and hugged him from behind. "Please, don't kill him," she whispered, shaking in fear. Every vampire in the castle dropped to their knees because no human had ever touched King Lucien and survived. But instead of killing her, the king froze. His glowing red eyes slowly faded as the ancient blood curse inside him went silent for the first time in 400 years. Then he looked down at the girl in his arms and whispered something that terrified his entire kingdom. "Find out who she really is. The cruelest monsters are not the ones with fangs, but the ones who forget how to feel." Rain crashed against the black stone windows of the Crimson Court as silence spread across the ancient throne hall like cold smoke. Hundreds of vampires stood frozen beneath towering silver chandeliers, their pale faces lowered toward the polished marble floor. No one dared to breathe too loudly when Lucien Vale was angry. And tonight, the Vampire King was furious. At the center of the hall, a noble vampire knelt before the throne, trembling violently. His expensive velvet coat was soaked with sweat, his voice barely working. "Your Majesty, please," he whispered. Lucien said nothing. He simply stood there in complete silence, dressed in an immaculate black suit that looked untouched by time itself. His skin was impossibly pale beneath the dim candlelight. His silver eyes glowed faintly like winter moonlight reflecting across frozen water. Beautiful, cold, ancient. Every person in the room knew the truth about Lucien Vale. He had ruled for over 4 centuries. He had survived wars, betrayals, and blood feuds that destroyed entire kingdoms hidden beneath the human world. But the most terrifying thing about the Vampire King was not his strength. It was the fact that he felt absolutely nothing. No mercy, no warmth, no love. The kneeling noble suddenly broke into tears. "I only wanted power," he said shakily. "Please, my king." Lucien slowly descended the throne steps, one step at a time. Calm, elegant, deadly quiet. The sound of his shoes against marble echoed through the massive chamber like a countdown to something terrible. The guards lowered their eyes immediately. No one wanted to witness what happened next. Then Lucien finally spoke. His voice was soft, too soft. "You betrayed your own bloodline," he said, "and you endangered this entire kingdom for greed." The noble collapsed fully onto the floor. "Mercy." Lucien stared down at him without emotion. "Mercy," he repeated almost curiously, as if the word belonged to another language. Outside, thunder shook the castle towers. Rainwater slid down the stained glass windows while cold wind whispered through ancient corridors. Somewhere deep beneath the castle, bells began ringing slowly. 1, 2, 3. A warning to the kingdom that judgment had begun. Lucien raised one pale hand slightly. Instantly, every guard in the room stiffened. The kneeling noble shut his eyes in terror. But before another word could be spoken, the massive throne room doors suddenly burst open. A young woman stumbled inside, carrying a medical supply bag against her chest. She froze immediately. Her eyes widened in horror at the sight before her. Emma Carter had no idea where she was supposed to be. 10 minutes earlier, she had been delivering medication through the storm after picking up an emergency overnight shift for extra cash. Her old Honda had broken down near the forest road below the mountain. Then a strange driver offered her a ride toward the castle, claiming someone inside was injured and needed help immediately. Emma had only agreed because she needed the money. Hospital bills for her mother were already 3 months overdue. But now, standing inside the terrifying throne hall surrounded by silent strangers dressed in black, she realized something was horribly wrong. The air itself felt strange, heavy, cold enough to sting her lungs. The people staring at her did not look normal. Their skin was too pale, their eyes too sharp, and at the center of the room stood the most dangerously beautiful man she had ever seen in her life. Lucien slowly turned toward her. Their eyes met. Emma felt her heartbeat skip painfully inside her chest. There was something unnatural about him, something ancient hidden behind those silver eyes. Yet before fear could fully settle into her body, she noticed the man kneeling on the floor, shaking violently like he was about to collapse. Instinct moved faster than logic. "Oh my God," Emma gasped softly. "He's hurt." Several vampires immediately looked horrified. One guard stepped forward. "Human, stop." But Emma was already running forward through the massive hall. Lucien remained perfectly still as she approached him. Strange. Every human who ever stood before the Vampire King usually collapsed from fear alone. Yet this girl kept moving. Her cheap sneakers squeaked slightly against the marble floor as she rushed toward the kneeling noble. "Please move," she told Lucien breathlessly without realizing who she was speaking to. The entire room froze. No one spoke to the king that way. Ever. Lucien looked down at her silently. Emma barely reached his shoulder. Her oversized rain jacket was still dripping onto the floor, strands of wet blonde hair clinging to her cheeks. She smelled faintly like rainwater and vanilla hand cream. Human. Warm. Alive. "He needs help," Emma insisted nervously, trying to step around him. But Lucien did not move. For a moment, they simply stared at one another while thunder rolled outside the castle walls. Then something unexpected happened. The kneeling noble suddenly let out a broken cry behind Lucien. Emma reacted instantly. Without thinking, she grabbed Lucien from behind and wrapped both arms around him tightly, trying to pull him back. "Please don't hurt him," she whispered desperately. The throne room stopped breathing. Somewhere across the hall, a glass shattered against the floor. One of the royal guards physically dropped to one knee in shock. Another vampire covered her mouth in horror. Because no human had touched Lucien Vale in over 100 years. And every person in that room knew what usually happened to anyone foolish enough to try. But Lucien did not move. Emma slowly realized what she had done. Her arms loosened immediately. "I'm sorry," she whispered, stepping back quickly. "I just thought." She stopped speaking. Lucien's eyes had changed. The silver glow inside them was fading, not disappearing completely, softening. The violent energy that usually surrounded the Vampire King, like invisible fire, suddenly grew quiet. Calm. Ancient hunger that had haunted him for centuries vanished for one impossible second. Lucien himself looked stunned. He could hear her heartbeat clearly. Fast. Nervous. Human. Yet instead of awakening the monster inside him, the sound soothed it. The curse buried deep within his blood fell silent. 400 years of darkness suddenly interrupted by the warmth of one accidental hug. Emma took another nervous step backward. "Sir," she said quietly, "are you okay?" No one in the kingdom had ever asked the Vampire King that question before. Lucien stared at her as though seeing sunlight for the first time after centuries underground. Then slowly, unbelievably, he removed his black coat and placed it around her shaking shoulders. Gasps echoed throughout the throne room immediately. Emma blinked in confusion. The expensive fabric felt warm despite the freezing castle air. Lucien never looked away from her. "What is your name?" he asked softly. "Emma," she answered. The Vampire King repeated it almost like a prayer. "Emma." Somewhere deep inside the castle, ancient bells began ringing again. But this time, they did not sound like a warning. They sounded like destiny. By sunrise, Emma Carter had almost convinced herself the castle was some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Almost. Her tiny apartment smelled like instant coffee and laundry detergent when she finally walked through the front door at 6:30 in the morning. The old heater rattled loudly near the kitchen window while rainwater still slid down the glass outside. Everything looked painfully normal again. The worn couch. The unpaid medical bills stacked beside the microwave. Her mother sleeping quietly in the next room with the television still running at low volume. Emma stood there for a long moment, holding Lucien's black coat in both hands. The expensive fabric looked wildly out of place inside her tiny apartment, like royalty abandoned inside poverty. "Okay," she whispered to herself tiredly. None of that made sense. She dropped her keys onto the counter and finally noticed something inside the coat pocket. A folded black card. No name. No address. Only a silver symbol pressed into the center like a crest from another century. Emma frowned slightly. Rich people are so dramatic. She set the card down beside the sink and walked toward her mother's bedroom quietly. Diane Carter was asleep beneath 2 blankets, her breathing shallow but peaceful. Emma adjusted the blankets carefully before brushing hair away from her mother's forehead. "I am home," she whispered softly. Her mother opened her eyes slightly. "Long night." Emma laughed weakly. "You would not believe me if I told you." Diane smiled faintly before falling asleep again. Emma stood there watching her for another moment as exhaustion slowly settled over her shoulders. Everything she did revolved around keeping her mother safe. Extra shifts, Missed meals. Sleepless nights. She had no time for strange castles or emotionally confusing silver-eyed men. Yet somehow, Lucien's face refused to leave her thoughts. The way he stared at her after the hug. The sadness hidden beneath his calm voice. The strange loneliness surrounding him like invisible winter air. Emma shook her head quickly. Nope, she muttered. Absolutely not thinking about the vampire billionaire. Unfortunately, Lucien Vale was thinking about her too. Deep beneath the mountains, the Crimson Court had not slept. Massive council chambers echoed with angry voices while ancient vampires argued beneath towering ceilings carved with silver, symbols older than most human civilizations. The curse reacted. One elder hissed sharply. We all felt it. Impossible, another replied. Nothing has weakened the blood curse in 400 years. Then explain what happened to the king. Lucien sat silently at the end of the enormous obsidian table while chaos unfolded around him. Unlike the others, he showed no visible emotion. Calm, elegant, untouchable. Yet his fingers rested perfectly still against the armrest of his chair, because if he moved even slightly, the entire council would realize the truth. Emma's touch still lingered in his memory. Warm, gentle, human. One accidental embrace had quieted the darkness inside him more effectively than centuries of rituals and power ever had. The oldest council member finally stood slowly. Her silver hair shimmered beneath candlelight as she looked directly toward Lucien. Your Majesty, she said carefully. The human cannot remain involved. Silence filled the chamber instantly. Lucien's silver eyes lifted toward her. Explain. The curse chose to react through her. The elder's voice grew tense. That alone makes her dangerous. Another council member nodded immediately. Humans bring weakness. Emotion clouds judgment. If the kingdoms discover the king has bonded himself to a mortal girl, I have bonded myself to no one, Lucien interrupted calmly. But even he could hear the slight shift in his own voice. The council heard it too. Fear spread instantly across several faces. Because immortal creatures notice changes humans never could. And Lucien Vale was changing. The elder stepped closer carefully. Forgive my honesty, my king, but your curse has defined your reign for centuries. Without it, she hesitated. You may no longer be the ruler this kingdom fears. Lucien slowly stood from his chair. Every voice in the chamber died immediately. Fear, he repeated quietly. Is that truly all this kingdom has ever wanted from me? No one answered. Lucien looked around the room, filled with ancient vampires who had followed him for generations. Some respected him. Most feared him. None had ever asked whether he was happy. Not once in 400 years. His gaze darkened slightly. The girl remains untouched, he said coldly. That is not a request. Then he walked out of the council chamber without another word. Meanwhile, 3 hours away in downtown Chicago, Emma was already late for work. Emma, her manager shouted across the diner. Table 7 still needs coffee. Coming. Emma answered quickly while balancing 2 plates of pancakes in her arms. The diner buzzed with morning noise. Forks clattering. Coffee machines hissing. Customers complaining about weather and traffic. Completely ordinary. Exactly the kind of life Emma understood. But every few minutes, her mind drifted back. To the castle. She accidentally poured orange juice into a coffee mug. Twice. You okay? Her co-worker Lily asked quietly. Emma forced a smile. Just tired. Lily leaned closer immediately. You met a guy, did not you? Emma nearly dropped an entire tray. What? No. That is definitely a yes. Lily grinned. You only look this distracted when a man is involved. Emma laughed nervously. Trust me, this one is not my type. The second the words left her mouth, she remembered Lucien standing beside the fireplace in rolled-up sleeves with silver eyes reflecting firelight. Her face turned red instantly. Lily gasped dramatically. Oh my God, he is attractive. Can we please not do this? Emma whispered. Before Lily could continue teasing her, the bell above the diner entrance rang softly. Cold air drifted inside from the street. Emma turned automatically toward the door and froze completely. Lucien Vale stood quietly near the entrance wearing a dark charcoal coat and black gloves. The entire diner seemed smaller with him inside it. More silent, more dangerous, yet somehow impossibly elegant at the same time. Several customers looked up immediately without understanding why the stranger drew attention so easily. Lucien's eyes found Emma instantly, and for one terrifying second, The ancient king looked relieved just to see her alive. Emma stared at him speechlessly. You, she whispered. Lily looked between them with wide eyes. Okay, she muttered quietly. That man looks illegally handsome. Emma barely heard her, because Lucien was already walking toward her slowly through the diner. Calm, controlled, completely out of place among coffee mugs and breakfast menus. He stopped directly in front of her. Good morning, Emma. Her heart immediately betrayed her by beating too fast again. How did you find me? She asked softly. Lucien glanced around the diner with faint curiosity. You left your name on the medication order receipt. Emma blinked once. Right. Normal stalking behavior. To her shock, Lucien looked genuinely thoughtful. Was I supposed to wait longer before visiting? Emma stared at him for 2 full seconds before laughing accidentally. Actual laughter. Warm and surprised. The sound seemed to affect Lucien immediately. His expression softened again in that strange, impossible way only she could trigger. Nearby customers openly watched them now. An elderly waitress walked past slowly just to stare at Lucien twice. Emma lowered her voice quickly. What are you doing here? Lucien reached into his coat pocket and removed the black card she had left behind earlier. You forgot this. Emma looked down at the silver crest on the card. You came all the way here for that. Lucien hesitated slightly, then quietly answered the truth. No. Emma forgot how to breathe for a second after Lucien answered. The busy sounds inside the diner suddenly felt distant. Coffee machines hissed somewhere behind the counter. Plates clattered. Customers laughed softly near the windows while snow began replacing rain outside on the Chicago streets. But none of it mattered anymore, because the ancient man standing in front of her had just admitted he came there for her. Not for the card. Not for business. Her. Emma quickly looked around the diner nervously. You cannot just show up at my job looking like that, she whispered urgently. Lucien tilted his head slightly. Like what? Emma stared at him in disbelief. Like you walked out of a luxury cologne commercial during the apocalypse. Lucien looked genuinely confused again. Is that bad? Emma pressed one hand against her forehead. You really do not spend much time around normal people, do you? No, Lucien answered honestly. I do not. Something about the way he said it made Emma's chest tighten unexpectedly. He sounded calm, but beneath the calm was isolation so deep it almost felt physical. Before she could respond, her manager suddenly appeared beside them. Emma, he snapped impatiently. Customers are waiting. Then his eyes landed on Lucien. Instantly, his entire attitude changed. Sir, he said awkwardly, straightening his apron. Can I get you a table? Lucien's silver eyes shifted toward the man for half a second. No. The manager immediately stepped back without understanding why his body suddenly felt cold. Emma noticed it. She noticed how people unconsciously lowered their voices around Lucien. How the atmosphere itself changed near him. Like some invisible pressure followed him everywhere. Take your break, the manager muttered quickly before practically fleeing. Emma blinked in surprise. He never lets anybody take breaks during breakfast rush. Lucien looked toward her calmly. He seemed stressed. Emma stared at him. What exactly did you do? Nothing. That answer somehow sounded more suspicious than if he had admitted something. Emma sighed tiredly before removing her apron. Fine. 5 minutes. That is all I have. Lucien nodded once. Emma grabbed 2 coffees and led him toward the empty booth near the back window. Every customer in the diner watched them quietly as they passed. Mostly because Lucien looked impossible to ignore. Even sitting down across from Emma, he carried himself like someone born to command kingdoms. Which, technically, he was. Emma slid 1 coffee toward him. Careful, she warned. It is hot. Lucien stared at the cup cautiously. Humans enjoy drinking liquids that burn them? Emma almost laughed again. It is called coffee. It keeps society functioning. Lucien observed the dark liquid seriously before taking a careful sip. His expression remained unreadable for exactly 2 seconds. Then Emma watched the immortal vampire king physically blink in confusion. This is terrible, he said. Emma burst out laughing so loudly that several customers turned toward them immediately. Real laughter. Bright and warm and impossible to fake. Lucien stared at her silently while the sound filled the diner. Something ancient inside him softened again. He had heard symphonies performed in royal courts. Heard crowds cheer his name centuries ago. None of it compared to the sound of Emma Carter laughing at coffee. You are smiling again, Emma noticed. Lucien immediately looked away toward the snowy window. You notice too many things. Occupational hazard, Emma replied. Waitresses survive by reading people. Lucien went quiet after that, because no one had truly read him in centuries. Most saw power first, fear second, death third. But Emma kept looking past all of that toward the exhausted man hidden underneath. So, Emma said carefully after a moment, what exactly is going on with your family? Lucien's eyes returned to hers slowly. Family. The people at the castle. Emma lowered her voice. The creepy council members who looked ready to panic because I hugged you. Lucien leaned back slightly in the booth. They fear change. Emma stirred cream into her coffee absent-mindedly. And you? Lucien answered immediately. I fear nothing. But Emma noticed the hesitation buried underneath the words. Tiny, almost invisible, yet real. Before she could ask more questions, the bell above the diner entrance rang sharply again. 3 men entered wearing dark coats despite the heating inside the building. Emma felt uncomfortable immediately. Something about them seemed wrong. Too still, too focused. The tallest one scanned the diner before his eyes locked directly onto Lucien, then onto Emma. Lucien's entire posture changed instantly. Calm became alert, ancient, dangerous in a way that made the air itself feel colder. Stay seated, he said quietly. Emma frowned. Why? But Lucien was already standing. The 3 strangers began walking toward them slowly. Customers nearby started noticing the tension now. One mother quietly moved her child closer protectively. The tallest stranger stopped beside their booth and lowered his head slightly toward Lucien. Your Majesty, he said carefully. Emma nearly choked on her coffee. Majesty. Lucien's silver eyes darkened faintly. You were ordered not to follow me. The council insisted, the stranger replied. There are concerns regarding the human. Emma looked between them rapidly. Okay, I officially hate when people call me that. The stranger ignored her completely. The elders believe her continued presence may destabilize the curse. Emma crossed her arms immediately. I am sitting right here, by the way. Still ignored. Lucien's expression became colder with every second. Leave, he said softly. The stranger hesitated. Your Majesty, now. Every light inside the diner flickered once. Customers gasped quietly. Emma felt goosebumps rush across her arms. The 3 men immediately lowered their heads before backing away. Without another word, within seconds, they disappeared outside into the snowy street. Silence lingered around the booth afterward. Emma stared at Lucien across the table. You are definitely not a billionaire, she whispered. Lucien said nothing. Emma leaned forward slowly. You are some kind of king. He remained silent again, which was answer enough. Emma sat back in shock while trying to process the impossible. Oh my God, she breathed softly. The castle was real. Lucien watched her carefully now, waiting for fear. Humans always reached the same moment eventually. The moment they understood what he truly was. Usually they ran afterward. But Emma surprised him again. She looked exhausted more than terrified. You should have told me sooner, she muttered. Lucien blinked once. That I am a king? That people are apparently hunting me because I hugged the wrong, emotionally repressed, immortal man. For the first time in over a century, Lucien laughed quietly. The sound was low and brief and almost disbelieving, like even he had forgotten how it felt. Emma stared at him in shock. Wow, she whispered. You actually can laugh. Lucien looked at her afterward with something dangerously close to warmth in his silver eyes. Only around you. The words hit Emma harder than they should have. Before either of them could speak again, Emma's phone suddenly rang loudly in her apron pocket. She answered immediately. Hello. Her face lost color within seconds. What? Lucien stood instantly as fear entered her voice. Emma slowly lowered the phone with shaking fingers. That was the hospital, she whispered. My mother collapsed this morning. The drive to St. Mercy Hospital felt unreal. Snow blurred across the windshield while Chicago traffic crawled slowly through downtown streets, glowing with red brake lights and neon reflections. Emma sat in the passenger seat of Lucien's black car with both hands shaking in her lap. She had tried calling the hospital 3 more times during the drive, but every update sounded worse than the last. Low oxygen levels, difficulty breathing, emergency treatment. Emma kept hearing medical terms she could barely process because fear was drowning everything else. She was fine this morning, Emma whispered weakly while staring out the window. She was literally sleeping when I left. Lucien sat beside her in complete silence for several seconds. Unlike normal cars, his vehicle moved impossibly smoothly through traffic. No engine noise. No sudden stops. Just quiet luxury surrounding them while snow fell harder outside. Humans hide pain from the people they love, Lucien said softly. Emma swallowed hard. Yeah. Her voice cracked slightly afterward. She does that a lot. Lucien looked toward her then. Really looked at her. He noticed how tightly she pressed her fingers together whenever anxiety grew stronger. He noticed how she kept blaming herself every few minutes without saying the words out loud. He noticed everything now, and every emotion inside her affected him more than it should have. For 100 years ruling immortal kingdoms had never prepared him for the unbearable feeling of seeing one human girl afraid. Emma suddenly laughed bitterly under her breath. This is embarrassing. Lucien frowned faintly. What is? You barely know me, and now you are driving me to the hospital because my life is falling apart in front of you. Lucien answered immediately. Your life is not falling apart. Emma looked at him tiredly. That confidence is adorable considering you do not even know my electric bill situation. Something unexpectedly warm touched Lucien's expression again. Emma always did that. Pulled him away from darkness with strange little comments that should not matter, but somehow did. Outside the hospital, snow covered the sidewalks in thin white layers while ambulances flashed red lights against the stormy afternoon sky. Lucien parked near the emergency entrance and stepped out first. The freezing wind barely affected him. Emma hurried beside him while wrapping her coat tighter around herself. You really do not have to stay, she told him quickly while they entered the hospital lobby. I know you probably have important king stuff to do. Lucien glanced toward her calmly. There is nowhere more important. Emma looked away immediately because her heart suddenly forgot how to behave. Again, hospitals always smelled the same. Antiseptic, coffee, fear. Emma rushed toward the front desk, while Lucien followed silently behind her. Nurses moved quickly through crowded hallways while televisions mounted near the ceiling played weather updates no one was really watching. Diane Carter, Emma said breathlessly to the receptionist. I got a call about my mother. The receptionist typed quickly before nodding. Room 814. Cardiology wing. Emma thanked her immediately and turned toward the elevators. But before she could walk away, the receptionist suddenly looked up at Lucien. Her entire posture changed slightly. Sir, she said nervously. Are you family? Lucien answered without hesitation. I am with Emma. The receptionist blinked once, visibly flustered by the intensity of his silver eyes. Right? Of course. Emma pulled Lucien toward the elevator before the poor woman completely forgot how to function. You seriously do something weird to people, Emma muttered. They look at you like they forgot their own names. Lucien considered this. That is unfortunate. Emma almost smiled despite everything. The elevator doors opened quietly onto the cardiology floor. Emma immediately spotted her mother's doctor speaking with two nurses near the hallway windows. Dr. Harris, she called quickly. The older man turned toward her with tired eyes. Emma, I am glad you made it. Her stomach dropped instantly at the tone in his voice. How bad is it? The doctor sighed softly before leading her slightly away from the nurses. Your mother's condition is worsening faster than expected. Her heart is struggling under the stress. Emma felt cold all over. But she has been taking her medication. I know. His voice became gentler. But stress and exhaustion make recovery difficult. Emma stared at the hospital floor silently while panic rose higher inside her chest. What happens now? Dr. Harris hesitated carefully. There is another treatment option. Emma looked up immediately. Okay, then do it. The doctor's expression tightened slightly. Insurance will not fully cover this procedure. Emma already knew what that meant before he finished speaking. Money. Always money. How much? She whispered. The number hit her like ice water. Emma physically stepped backward. I cannot afford that. Dr. Harris looked genuinely sympathetic. I am sorry. Emma nodded automatically, even though she barely heard him anymore. Her mind raced desperately through impossible calculations. Extra shifts. Loans. Selling furniture. Selling the car. None of it would be enough. Not even close. Can I see her? Emma asked quietly. Of course. Room 814 was dim and peaceful compared to the busy hospital outside. Diane Carter rested against white pillows while heart monitors beeped softly nearby. She looked smaller than usual somehow, fragile beneath the blankets. Emma immediately walked to her bedside, and took her hand carefully. Hey, Mom. Diane opened her eyes slowly before smiling faintly. There is my favorite girl. Emma laughed softly despite tears threatening her eyes. You say that because I am your only child. Still counts. Diane's gaze slowly shifted toward Lucien, standing quietly near the doorway. And who is this handsome man? Emma nearly choked. Mom. Diane smiled weakly. What? I may be sick, but I am not blind. Lucien stepped closer politely. Lucien Vale. Diane studied him carefully for a moment. Unlike most humans, she did not immediately look intimidated by him. Older souls sometimes sensed loneliness faster than fear. You care about my daughter, Diane said softly. It was not a question. Lucien looked toward Emma instinctively before answering. Yes. The honesty in his voice made Emma's face turn red instantly. Diane noticed everything. Mothers always did. Good. She whispered before closing her eyes briefly from exhaustion. Emma sat beside the bed for nearly an hour afterward while Lucien remained quietly nearby. He never complained, never checked a phone, never acted impatient. He simply stayed. And the strangest part was that his presence made the terrifying hospital room feel calmer somehow. Safer. At one point Emma finally looked toward him tiredly. You know, she said softly, you really do not act like a king. Lucien leaned slightly against the wall near the window. What should a king act like? Emma thought for a moment. Colder. Lucien's silver eyes rested on her gently. Perhaps I am tired of being cold. The words settled between them quietly while snow continued falling outside the hospital windows. Emma looked down at her mother sleeping peacefully and felt something shift inside her chest again. Because for the first time in years, she did not feel completely alone carrying the weight of the world. But neither of them noticed the figure standing silently across the street outside the hospital. Pale. Watching. Ancient silver markings glowing faintly beneath dark gloves. One of the council elders lowered her hood slowly while staring directly toward the hospital room window where Emma stood beside Lucien. Then she whispered 5 terrifying words into the winter air. The curse has truly awakened. There are moments in life when everything changes quietly. No thunder. No explosions. Just one sentence that rearranges the entire future. For Emma Carter, that moment arrived the next morning when she opened her mailbox and found the hospital bill. She stood alone in the apartment kitchen wearing oversized sweatpants and one of her old college hoodies while weak winter sunlight filtered through cracked blinds. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. The number printed at the bottom looked impossible. Cold. Final. Emma slowly sat down at the tiny kitchen table without taking her eyes off the bill. Her mother's treatment had to begin within the week. Without it, the doctor could no longer promise recovery. Emma pressed both hands over her face as exhaustion crashed into her all at once. 3 jobs still would not be enough. Selling the apartment would not be enough. Nothing she had was enough. For several minutes, the apartment remained completely silent except for the ticking wall clock and distant city traffic outside. Then her phone vibrated softly against the table. Unknown number. Emma hesitated before answering. Hello. You sound unhappy. Lucien's voice flowed gently through the phone like dark velvet. Calm. Deep. Immediately recognizable. Emma leaned back in her chair slowly. How did you even get this number? You wrote it on the hospital. Paperwork yesterday. Emma sighed tiredly. Right. Again with the completely legal stalking behavior. Something warm touched Lucien's voice. You are distressed. Emma stared down at the medical bill in silence. Lucien waited patiently on the other end of the call. Immortal creatures understood silence differently than humans. Most people rushed to fill empty spaces. Lucien listened to them. It is my mom, Emma admitted quietly. The treatment costs more than I make in a year. Outside her apartment window, snow drifted softly across Chicago streets while morning traffic moved below. Lucien remained silent for several seconds. But deep beneath the mountains at the Crimson Court, the ancient king's silver eyes darkened faintly. He had witnessed empires collapse, watched nations burn themselves apart over greed and power. Yet somehow, the thought of Emma sitting alone worrying about money made him feel something far more dangerous than anger. Helpless. How much? He asked calmly. Emma laughed weakly. Trust me, it is horrifying. Emma. The way he said her name always felt strangely intimate. Careful, like something precious he did not want to damage. She looked back down at the bill and finally told him. Silence followed again. Then Lucien answered softly. That amount means nothing. Emma blinked once. Excuse me. Your mother will receive the treatment. Lucien, today. Emma sat upright immediately. No, the answer surprised even herself. Lucien's voice lowered slightly. You would refuse help? I would refuse becoming some kind of charity case. That is not what this is. Emma stood and began pacing the kitchen anxiously. You barely know me. I know enough. Her heartbeat quickened unexpectedly at the quiet certainty in his voice. Lucien, I cannot let you spend that kind of money on us. Why? Emma stopped walking. Why? Such a simple question. Yet no one had ever asked her that before. Most people simply accepted that struggling humans were supposed to carry impossible burdens alone. Because people do not do things like that without expecting something back, she whispered. On the other side of the city, Lucien stood silently inside the massive library of the Crimson Court while snowstorms covered the mountain forests outside. What do you believe I want from you? He asked quietly. Emma opened her mouth, but no answer came out. Because honestly, she did not know anymore. Lucien terrified her sometimes, confused her constantly. Yet whenever she looked into his silver eyes, she never saw manipulation. Only loneliness, ancient and endless. You are not used to kindness, Lucien realized softly. The words hit harder than they should have. Emma leaned against the kitchen counter and closed her eyes briefly. Kindness usually comes with bills attached. Then allow me to be the first exception. Silence filled the line again. Emma could hear faint crackling from a fireplace somewhere near him. Imagined him standing alone in that enormous castle wearing black suits while snow buried the world outside. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. This time, Lucien answered honestly. Because your pain affects me. Emma's breath caught softly. Before she could respond, another voice suddenly echoed somewhere near Lucien. Female. Cold. Your Majesty, the council has arrived. Emma immediately straightened. I should let you go. No, Lucien's answer came too quickly, too instinctively. Then his voice softened again. I will call you later. The line disconnected gently afterward. Emma stared at her phone for several seconds before lowering it slowly. Something about him felt dangerous in ways she still could not understand. But something else felt safe. And that terrified her more. Meanwhile, inside the Crimson Court, tension spread through the castle like approaching thunder. 12 council elders stood beneath the vaulted ceilings of the ancient war chamber, wearing ceremonial black robes lined with silver thread. Their expressions looked grim as Lucien entered the room. You summoned me, he said calmly. The eldest woman stepped forward immediately. We warned you about the human. Lucien's silver eyes remained unreadable. Emma Carter is not your concern. She has become exactly our concern. Another elder opened an ancient leather book filled with faded symbols and blood-red markings. The curse is weakening every time she touches you. Lucien said nothing, because denying it would be pointless now. The room itself had already sensed the change within him. The elder continued carefully. 400 years ago, the blood curse was created to suppress emotion within the royal line. Love made kings weak. Compassion destroyed kingdoms. The curse removed those weaknesses. Lucien's gaze darkened slightly, and turned us into monsters instead. Uneasy silence followed. One younger council member stepped forward urgently. Your Majesty, if the curse fully breaks, the entire balance of vampire society changes. Then perhaps it should. The statement shocked the entire chamber. Lucien slowly approached the enormous stained glass windows overlooking endless frozen mountains. For centuries we ruled through fear because fear was all we understood. His voice lowered quietly. Then one human girl hugged me, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to breathe. No one spoke, because none of them had ever heard the Vampire King sound human before. The eldest elder finally whispered the truth everyone feared most. You are falling in love with her. Lucien stared out at the snowfall silently. He remembered Emma laughing inside the diner. Emma holding her mother's hand in the hospital room. Emma looking at him not as a king or monster, but as a lonely man standing beside a fireplace. And for the first time in centuries, the immortal ruler stopped denying the impossible. Yes, Lucien answered softly. The chamber fell into complete silence. Then the eldest elder closed the ancient book slowly and whispered words that made even immortals uneasy. Then the prophecy has begun. Some truths do not arrive like lightning. They arrive quietly, slowly, like snow burying a city while nobody notices until the streets disappear. 3 days after the council spoke of prophecy, Emma Carter began noticing strange things around her. The first happened outside the hospital pharmacy. She was carrying a paper bag filled with her mother's medication when an expensive black SUV suddenly stopped beside the sidewalk. Two men stepped out wearing dark suits and silver gloves despite the freezing weather. "Miss Carter," one of them said politely, "your account balance has been resolved." Emma frowned immediately. "What account?" The man handed her a sealed envelope before both strangers returned to the vehicle without another explanation. Emma opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a statement from St. Mercy Hospital. Total balance, paid in full. Emma stopped breathing for a second. The treatment, the surgery, every bill, paid. Her first reaction was not relief. It was panic, because only one person on earth could have done this. 20 minutes later, she stormed through the front doors of the Crimson Court, with snow still clinging to her boots and fury burning across her face. The vampire guards moved aside instantly when they saw her approaching. Nobody dared stop the human girl anymore. Not after the king himself had changed because of her. Emma barely noticed the castle around her now. The towering black halls. The ancient chandeliers. The endless silver symbols carved into stone walls older than American history itself. She marched directly toward Lucien's library while clutching the hospital statement tightly in her hand. The massive doors opened before she even touched them. Lucien stood beside the fireplace exactly like the first night she met him. Calm, elegant, untouchable. Yet the moment he saw Emma, something inside his silver eyes softened instantly. "You are angry," he observed quietly. Emma walked straight toward him. "You paid the hospital." Lucien remained perfectly calm. "Yes." "Lucien." She threw the statement onto the nearby desk. "That was not your decision to make." The fire crackled softly between them while snowstorms raged outside the towering windows. Lucien watched her carefully. "Your mother needed treatment. That does not mean you get to secretly spend millions of dollars on my family. Money is irrelevant to me." Emma stared at him in disbelief. "Well, it is not irrelevant to normal people." Lucien moved slightly closer. "You said your mother was suffering. That is not the point." "Then explain the point to me." His voice remained frustratingly calm. Emma opened her mouth immediately, but stopped because, honestly, she did not know how to explain this feeling. Gratitude tangled with fear. Relief tangled with guilt. Nobody had ever solved problems for her before. Nobody had ever looked at her pain and simply removed it. "I do not want to owe you something," she whispered finally. Lucien's expression changed subtly, almost wounded. "Emma." He stepped closer again. "You owe me nothing." The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten painfully. "Then why do this?" Lucien stared at her for several long seconds. Ancient creatures rarely feared honesty. But this felt different somehow. More dangerous than war. "Because when you hurt," he said quietly, "I cannot think clearly anymore." Silence filled the room instantly. Emma forgot the speech she planned during the drive over. Forgot her anger completely. Because nobody had ever spoken to her like that before. Lucien glanced toward the fire briefly before continuing in a lower voice. "For centuries I believed emotion was weakness." His silver eyes returned to hers slowly. "Then you walked into my life, and suddenly everything I considered weakness began feeling more important than power." Emma's heartbeat became uneven again. She hated how easily he affected her now. Hated how safe she felt standing near someone who should terrify her. "You barely know me," she whispered. Lucien answered immediately. "I know you work yourself exhausted caring for others." Another step closer. "I know you apologize whenever you are in pain because you do not want to burden people." Another step. "I know you smile even when you are afraid because you think everyone else deserves comfort more than you do." Emma's eyes slowly widened. Because he was right. About all of it. Lucien stopped directly in front of her now. Close enough that she could see tiny silver flecks inside his eyes reflecting firelight. "And I know," he said softly, "that you hugged a monster without hesitation because someone needed kindness." The room felt too quiet suddenly. Too warm. Emma looked away first because the intensity in his gaze became impossible to survive for long. "You are not a monster," she whispered. Lucien's expression darkened faintly. "Emma, no." She shook her head firmly. "Lonely is not the same thing as evil." Those words hit Lucien harder than any weapon ever could. For 100 years. For 100 years of fear, obedience, and silence. Yet one human girl looked directly at the immortal king and saw loneliness instead of terror. Before Lucien could answer, the library doors suddenly opened. The eldest councilwoman entered quickly with visible urgency. "Your Majesty." Her sharp eyes immediately landed on Emma standing beside him. Disapproval flashed across her pale face. "We need to speak privately." Lucien's voice cooled instantly. "Then speak." The elder hesitated. "The prophecy markings have appeared." Silence. Emma frowned slightly. "What prophecy?" Nobody answered her immediately. The elder slowly placed an ancient parchment onto the desk beside the fire. Strange silver symbols glowed faintly across the yellowed paper like living moonlight. Emma stared at the markings uneasily. Something about them felt familiar somehow. Impossible, but familiar. Lucien's expression hardened the moment he saw the parchment. "Who discovered this?" "The royal archives," the elder answered quietly, "hidden beneath the original throne chamber." Emma looked between them anxiously. "Okay, somebody needs to explain why every conversation in this castle sounds like the beginning of a horror movie." The elder ignored her completely. "Your Majesty, the prophecy specifically describes a human woman who quiets the blood curse through compassion instead of fear." Lucien remained silent. "And?" The elder's pale gaze shifted slowly toward Emma. "It also says her arrival marks the fall of the immortal throne." Cold silence spread across the library. Emma laughed nervously. "Right. Well, that sounds incredibly dramatic." Nobody else laughed. Lucien stepped protectively closer to her, without even realizing he had done it. The elder noticed immediately. "You see," she whispered. "It has already begun." Emma looked at Lucien uneasily now. What exactly are they talking about? Lucien's jaw tightened slightly. But before he could answer, the elder quietly spoke the words that changed everything. 400 years ago, the woman who created the blood curse was human. Emma's heartbeat stopped for one terrifying second. The elder continued slowly while staring directly into her eyes. "And you look exactly like her." Emma felt the room tilt beneath her feet. The fire crackled softly inside the massive library while snowstorms buried the mountains beyond the towering windows, yet suddenly none of it felt real anymore. "What did you just say?" she whispered. The council elder stood perfectly still beneath the candlelight, her pale face unreadable. "The woman who created the blood curse was named Serafina Vale," she said slowly. "She was human." Emma looked immediately toward Lucien. "Vale?" Lucien's jaw tightened faintly. "She was my wife." Silence exploded across Emma's mind. Wife. Human. Curse. For 100 years. The words crashed together until she could barely breathe. "No," she said weakly while shaking her head. "No, that does not make sense." The elder stepped closer to the ancient parchment resting on the desk. Strange silver markings still glowed faintly across the paper like moonlight trapped beneath glass. Serafina was the only human ever loved by a vampire king, the elder explained carefully. When enemies discovered the king's love for her, they used that love against him. Entire kingdoms burned because of the war that followed. Emma stared silently at the glowing symbols while a cold ache spread slowly through her chest. Lucien had been married, loved someone before, someone who looked exactly like her. The elder continued in a low voice. Before Serafina died, she created the blood curse to remove emotional weakness from the royal bloodline forever. Lucien turned toward the fire without speaking. Ancient pain shadowed his expression now. Not dramatic, not loud. Worse, quiet pain. The kind that survives centuries. Emma suddenly understood why loneliness followed him everywhere like winter air. "You never told me," she whispered softly. Lucien's silver eyes lifted toward her slowly. "I have not spoken her name aloud in over 300 years. Emma looked away immediately because something sharp twisted painfully inside her chest. She hated that feeling. Jealousy made no sense here. Not against a dead woman from 4 centuries ago. Yet somehow it still hurt. The elder noticed the shift instantly. "This is exactly why the prophecy terrifies the council," she said. "History is repeating itself." Emma crossed her arms tightly. "Except I am not this Serafina person." "No," the elder replied quietly. "But you carry her bloodline." Silence. Emma blinked once. "What?" "The Carter family descended from Serafina's younger sister after the war." The elder pointed carefully toward the parchment. "The prophecy says the curse can only be broken by the return of her blood." Emma physically stepped backward. That is impossible. Lucian finally spoke again, his deep voice quieter now. The moment you touched me, the curse weakened. Emma looked at him immediately. So this entire thing, me meeting you, her voice faltered. It was destiny? Lucian held her gaze for several long seconds before answering honestly. I do not know. For some reason, that answer hurt more than certainty would have. Because Emma suddenly realized something terrifying. What if Lucian's feelings for her were not real? What if she only reminded him of the woman he lost centuries ago? The thought settled heavily inside her chest. Emma stepped farther away from him slowly. Lucian noticed instantly. Emma, do not. She shook her head quickly while trying to steady her breathing. I need a second. The elder wisely remained silent while Emma walked toward the massive windows overlooking endless snow-covered mountains. Her reflection stared back faintly through the dark glass. Same blonde hair. Same pale skin. Same face as the woman who once broke an immortal king centuries ago. This is insane, Emma whispered. Lucian approached carefully behind her. You are not Serafina. Emma laughed bitterly under her breath. But I look exactly like her. That changes nothing. Emma turned toward him sharply. How can you know that? The question struck deeper than she intended. Lucian went completely still. Emma's eyes shimmered slightly now, not from fear, but from something far more vulnerable. How do you know you are seeing me? She whispered. And not her. The room fell silent. Even the fire seemed quieter afterward. Lucian stared at Emma as though the question itself wounded him. Because the truth was, he had asked himself the same thing every night since meeting her. At first he thought destiny was mocking him. Another human woman with Serafina's face appearing exactly when the curse began weakening. It felt impossible, cruel even. But then Emma laughed at terrible coffee, argued with him inside diners, worried more about hospital bills than ancient prophecies, hugged strangers because they looked sad. Serafina had been graceful, noble, raised among kings. Emma Carter was stubborn, exhausted, sarcastic, and entirely herself. And somehow, Lucian loved every impossible part of her already. He stepped closer slowly until only inches separated them. Because Serafina never looked at me the way you do, he said quietly. Emma's heartbeat stumbled painfully. Lucian's silver eyes never left hers. She saw a king she admired. His voice softened further. You see a lonely man hiding behind a throne. The honesty nearly shattered Emma completely. She looked away first because the emotion inside his gaze became too overwhelming to survive for long. You barely know me, she whispered again, though the words sounded weaker now. Lucian answered immediately. I know enough to recognize the difference between memory and love. The elder cleared her throat softly behind them. Your Majesty. Lucian's expression darkened slightly without looking away from Emma. What? The council will not accept this peacefully. The warmth inside the room faded immediately. Reality returned. Kingdoms. Power. Fear. The elder's pale face looked genuinely troubled now. Many believe Emma Carter represents the collapse of vampire rule itself. Emma frowned slightly. Why? The elder hesitated before answering. Because if the blood curse breaks fully, vampires will begin feeling emotions the way humans do again. Emma blinked once. That sounds good. No, the elder whispered. It sounds dangerous. Lucian finally turned toward the councilwoman completely. Dangerous to whom? To every structure this kingdom was built upon. Her voice sharpened slightly. Fear controls immortals. Without it, loyalty weakens. Power fractures. Lucian's silver eyes grew colder with every word. Then perhaps our kingdom deserves to fracture. The elder looked genuinely stunned. Your Majesty, enough. The command echoed through the library like distant thunder. Silence followed instantly. Lucian moved protectively closer to Emma again before speaking in a voice colder than winter itself. Emma Carter remains under my protection. The elder lowered her head reluctantly. And if the council disagrees? Lucian's expression became terrifyingly calm. Then the council may remember who sits upon the throne. Even Emma felt chills afterward. Because for the first time since meeting him, she fully understood something important. Lucian was gentle with her by choice. Not weakness. Choice. Beneath the quiet sadness and silver eyes lived an ancient king capable of terrifying an entire immortal kingdom without raising his voice. The elder finally bowed before leaving the library silently. Once the doors closed, the room felt strangely fragile again. Emma slowly sat down near the fireplace, emotionally exhausted. I think my life officially became insane. Lucien watched her carefully before sitting across from her. Are you afraid of me now? Emma looked at him for a long moment. Honest moment. No, she admitted softly. I think I am afraid of what this is becoming. Lucien understood immediately, because he felt it too. Something larger than attraction, larger than prophecy, something ancient waking quietly between them while snow buried the world outside. Emma stared into the fire thoughtfully. If this curse breaks completely, she hesitated. What happens to you? Lucien's gaze darkened faintly. No king has ever survived losing it. Emma looked up sharply. What does that mean? But Lucien did not answer immediately. And somewhere deep beneath the crimson court, hidden far below the castle foundations, ancient silver symbols suddenly began glowing across the walls of the original throne chamber for the first time in 400 years.